So without further ado, I'm just going to switch on the chat here. I nearly left the meeting. That would have been shocking. All right. So I'm gonna
don't play the technology.
Yeah, don't touch the technology, Steve. All right. So look, I will start by saying it's wonderful to be doing this event. It was kind of spontaneous. And one of these events that I think we could say seemed like a good idea at the time and hopefully will remain a good idea. And just to realize you can actually just do things in a fairly spontaneous way, although I did do a bit of planning for it in this context of Zoom. So I'm quite excited to be just sharing thoughts and ideas and getting you to meet amazing scientists like Matt Broome, who I've worked with extensively. But I'm not going to waffle because I need to actually start the structured situation. And before I do that, most importantly, I want to acknowledge that we are doing this let's call it broadcast from Bijigal country here in Maroubra, and it is always something I'm cognizant of, especially in a public context. It's a real privilege. I just arrived here on an airplane 12 years ago, sitting in a chair, and suddenly I'm in a whole other country, and I know this country's been around for a really long time. It's still a strange place to me. I'm still trying to understand it, still trying to get to know it. But I feel like this connection that I have with it is deepening over time. And it's really important to acknowledge this vast history that I've just come onto the very tip of. So that's what I want to do to start with. Now, I've got a bit of I'm going to introduce you extremely briefly to Matt, and that'll in a bit more extensively later. But before I do that, because Matt comes into the story, well, maybe I should just introduce you now. So Matt, because he's going to be sitting here while I talk. So Matt is someone I met about 2016 when you were working with Michelle Simmons's group at the Center for Quantum Computation and Communication Technology. I was looking to do work with them, and I remember walking into this lab, and there was this much younger, a little bit younger than you are now, Matt, but not much. But an absolutely, the first thing I was, you gave off this brightness, this warmth, and ever since that moment, I think we've been working quite closely together for years, and it's always a thrill. I love his ideas. He's tried so hard to explain quantum physics to me. I think to the point where it hurt his head a lot. But I think you did a pretty good job, I like to think. And you continue the conversation, and we're now working on quite different things to quantum physics, and that's what tonight's going to be about. So you're now working in the private sector, but still in the world of quantum physics. So maybe you can share a bit with us about that later. Or do you want to quickly share a word or two about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not as interesting as what I used to do, I guess, but working at university and academic circles was probably a bit more interesting. But yeah, definitely still in the quantum sort of regime, but it's a business, so that's why I come to places like this to interact with people like you.
Fair enough. And also, most importantly, thanks for that, Matt. I have to introduce you to the Evolver. I'm pointing over there, but it's because we're actually sharing a room with the Evolver machine, which I'm going to explain to you a bit more about who that is. The thing I'm most excited about is that to get the Evolver onto the Zoom, I had to give him, it seems to be him, because I think he's a model of me to some extent, his own email address. So the Evolver, a machine, has his own email address. And if you ever want to email him, he's theevolver@gmail.com. So feel free to send him emails. I don't know if he'll respond.
We should need a tweet account as well.
A Twitter account. We should get him. Okay, that's going to be an outcome from this project. Now, I'm going to immediately share a short slideshow with you just to give you some context, because it's really important that I do give you context for what this is all about. Share. Yes, that is correct. That is what, yeah. Thank you. All right. So, when this idea came up, the world felt like it was actually a simpler place. Since in the last 2 months, we've got this extraordinary AI technology, which is, I think, freaking a lot of people out. And I'm just talking about ChatGPT now. And so, this presentation came about a little bit. The idea was formulated before all that, and and I realized we possibly had quite a major turning point in our culture. I've got a picture of Michelangelo's famous The Creation with Adam, and I think it's Adam, right? And God over there. And that was, I think, a major turning point, at least, and I'm in the Western tradition of culture, in the European tradition. And what I love about this image is you can see that God is really stretching at his full length to reach Adam, and Adam is kind of, I think, quite indifferently just sort of vaguely sort of touching God. And it feels to me like it was a time in the history where, let's call it man, even though it's Women's Day, but this was, it was a different time. So I want to stick with the language, probably that would be more appropriate then. But man was coming into his own. He just invented perspective, and we're going to see the world from our point of view. So it was a very important, I think, cusp of our cultural evolution. How do I go to the next?
Should be able to.
That's weird. There we go. So this is actually a drawing I did in collaboration with the Evolver about 2 or 3 months ago. And I didn't think much of it. I was trying to experiment with doing some life-based drawings together with the machine's drawings. And I noticed, actually only recently, I just thought, I looked at it more carefully, and in the context in the context of the Michelangelo creation story, I felt like this work could be interpreted in that line as there's this human hand, in this case, my hand, and reaching into the work of the machine. And the machine is the black and red drawing done by the Evolver machine, because it records its activity by doing drawings. Now, what's interesting to me is I initially thought the drawing of the hand was quite a poor drawing, but then I looked more closely, and I don't know if you can see the pointing finger looks like it's severed. There's a real distress in it. And I interpret that now in the current context to be we made machines, and now they're kind of separating from us. They're becoming maybe their own thing, becoming indifferent to us. Often maybe they're God. Maybe they're now the God, and we are somewhat left behind, or inverted. It's just another way to sort of try and understand the problem of where we came from and where we're going. Now, this brings me to my collaboration with Matt. So in 2016, we worked together, and I remember we were doing a project with quantum physics. I wanted to be the artist in residence, trying to get my head around quantum physics and do some kind of collaborative project. And I remember saying to Matt at some point, or members of the group, that why don't I build you an atom? And which is what this is. And I'll just quickly see if I can, there it's running. And my thinking was a little bit tongue in cheek, admittedly, let's make the atom big, then it's easier to measure, right? So it seemed like a good idea. Like, I mean, why bother with those very expensive microscopes? I'll just make you a big atom and you can measure that. So that was the thinking. But I remember at the time, well, not at the time, a little bit later, being frustrated by the atom. I felt it was too ordered, too regular, too repeatable. The patterns that it gave always were essentially like that. The one on the left is what it looks like when the turntable that it's being drawn on is still, and the one on the right is really where the turntable is spinning. So, but essentially it's always the same, which is not that interesting. It's not what life's about. To me, I think, looking for life. I was looking for something that was more about life. So I persisted in evolving this machine, this atom, to see where it would go. And I'm rushing through this because I want to get to the meat of what we're doing here today. So I built a thing I built this version, which is actually the version. And why don't we get it started?
Let's start up, yeah.
You know what?
Bang.
Excuse me one moment. I have to release the lids from the pens.
There's a lot of duct tape in this setup. Let me just tell you that.
A lot of duct tape. Right, let it go. We'll just start off simply at first. So you'll see in the other screen there, the Evolve is now activated. So what I'm going to describe to you now is the most basic properties of this machine called the Evolver. It's part of this conversation now. It's very temperamental, as I've said. We don't really know what it's going to do. So we're just going to keep an eye on it. But essentially what it is it's got, and you can see it, it's got two parts. the part that you saw previously of the atom, there you can see there is what I call the regular, the predictable, repeatable part. It always does the same drawing. But on the other side of it, and you can see that if you look at the camera, closest to the camera, there's like a lot of quite frantic, almost chaotic activity. And that is called, that's the irregular pendulum. It's basically what it is not repeatable, okay? It produces novel drawings every time. And when I first made this, I looked at it and I got this feeling of I was looking at a model of myself with my regular core where I breathe. I can, you know, I know I'm alive when I'm breathing. My heart is beating fairly regularly. So yes, the regular is like the control of the system. It's got to keep it going to keep it alive. That regular core drives the irregular pendulum, and it's just got snag now, which is beautiful because that's what it does.
Decided to do.
Yeah, it's decided. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So the irregular pendulum is what I call the novel aspect. Always does different drawings in every setting. I take it to different locations to see what it's going to get up to. So these are the kind of drawings it does. Sometimes it even seems to know me, like it seems to know what I'm about. And on the odd occasion, it is drawn. I'm obsessed with birds. You know this, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an artist, I'm always trying to draw birds. My evolver during a residence at the Willoughby incinerator art space basically drew these birds. So I thought, this thing knows me. It's done the most extraordinary drawings of birds in flight. And I'm thinking, if only I could draw birds as well as the evolver can. So subsequently, I'm trying to steal its ideas. I'm trying to learn to draw like this, which is, I'm a long way off. But so it seems to know me. So what are we dealing with here, right? So this is all context that I'm giving you, all context to the experiment I did with Matt. So just, we almost through this part, but it's important that I just give you a sense of how we evolved to this point in our experiment. I have to now take you back to 2017, 2018, when I did a residence at the CSIRO. And very, I won't say flippantly, but I said to them, why don't I come here and build you machines to show you how the scientific process works? I am going to show you, scientists of CSIRO, how science works. And the idea would be like, it's essentially, these machines behave a little bit like the evolver in that they have a regular aspect and they drive some kind of irregularity. So I thought, well, maybe this would somehow simulate the idea of serendipity in science. So I built the machines. They were quite, you know, they were temperamental. I mean, it seems that I'm a temperamental builder of machines. I think it's because I'm not an engineer, thank heavens. So my machines tend to have their own personality. That thing is really not, do you want to, let me go, go give it a quick, just help him out there. And maybe what we'll do is I'll put on the central panel, and maybe that'll just give it a bit more, otherwise just give it a push. But this is what it does, all right? So I built these two machines, and the idea being that I was going to do this finale performance where the two machines would do a drawing. One machine does a drawing, the other machine does a drawing, and I'll then allow them to interact. All right, I mean, insane. I mean, it was a fairly insane experiment because the physicist there, John Loki, very well-known physicist, said to me, I'm clearly not a scientist because, you know, I haven't tested this in advance. I'm just going live, kind of what we're doing here tonight. So, you know, it's really all up in the air, but, you know, interesting things emerge from things that are not too carefully outlaid or planned. So I think it's an important part of certainly my working method is to allow this very almost stressful situation to just happen, because, you know, it's things that are far from equilibrium. When things are far from equilibrium, that real evolution, real growth actually happens. So I'm kind of terrified and comfortable with the idea. But now I'm going to show you a little brief video of my most humiliating moment. And it's an important video because it actually demonstrated something so important to me. So this is the performance that I was telling you about, where I was going to get the two machines to interact. I've got fairly crude video of it. And what you will see is that there's a scientist on this side driving the one machine called the scientist, and there's a scientist on the other side driving the other machine, which is actually, funnily enough, called Sid's nervous system interacting with the scientists at CSIRO, because I really felt nervous. I felt like I'd built my nervous system because it was that nerve-wracking, to be totally honest. So let's what you can see here is me kind of like trying to get the machines to work. All right. Now, the one machine, the chain kept jumping off. So it was a part of a bicycle, and it was basically behaving very temperamentally and very badly. And I was freaking out, but I was freaking out inside. So nobody was necessarily aware of my out freak. And then at a certain point, a very interesting thing happened, because part of the idea was I wanted the scientists to be interacting and bringing things onto the machine, and so it could be a reflection of what was happening at CSIRO. But a group of scientists gathered around the machines and gently jostled it and niggled it and tried to get the chain back on, and just very tenderly got these machines to work a little bit, not perfectly, but a little bit. And then I noticed, because you notice this piece of paper here, what that is me recording this. So essentially that piece of chain or wire is what's connecting the two machines, and I'm recording by attaching a pen, that paintbrush to it. And if you look over here, this is the final drawing. And it took me a while to realize something quite profound about it. Initially, I thought the objects I was making were in and of themselves the thing I was interested, like they were the interesting artwork. And then this drawing here was, I realized, capturing a collaboration between the scientists at CSIRO as well as my machine. So yeah, is a recording, if I could, I'm pointing to the screen, but obviously that's not really helping. But essentially what you're seeing here is a collaboration between humans, very tender. It took me a while to realize that, but it was a very tender collaboration between humans and machines. And then I realized what was most interesting is not the machine itself. That's part of it, yes. But it's what kind of interactions it can induce, or what is the system that I'm actually describing, what is actually going on. It's not just the machine. There's something about the way it's interacting with its environment. And I thought, well, that's something that I can now look at. And this is where Matt comes into it, because I said to Matt, it was about 4 months ago, Matt, why don't we, we were trying to think of something to do together. And I think we came up with the idea sort of jointly. I said, let's
do an experiment.
Yeah, exactly. Let's you interact with the machine. And I record it.
But do it in a scientific way.
Exactly. You come along, you're a physicist now, so you're going to show this machine a thing or two.
The idea was to consider putting a bit of rigor in the whole process.
Yes.
So having, having the method, we started out with a method, as you do with a scientific project, method, a hypothesis. We had some idea of like what would happen. And then obviously we executed the experiment, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then you documented it. You were the observer.
Exactly.
Which was an important aspect of it. I was sort of part of I was in it. I was in the experiment. So I was somewhat sort of, more involved with actually carrying out the experiment.
And I was very careful not to say a word. So it was a 30-minute experiment.
30-minute, yeah.
And at some point the dog ran in and almost killed you, but fortunately it didn't follow through. But for 30 minutes, you basically interacted with the machine. And I didn't say a word because I thought I have to, remain not indifferent, but what's the word, objective? Or So, but okay, so we did the experiment to see what the effect of the environment would be on the machine. So I think this is a good time now to actually say to you, like, I'm curious to know what you thought, what you. Oh, and the other thing which is really important is part of what we were hoping to achieve was write this up as a scientific, let's call it a science paper, science poem, science satire, but something that was empirical.
Yeah.
I really wanted the ideas to come from actual measurement, because I think otherwise you can really go off on several tangents.
I mean, you started telling me that essentially this machine was an emulation or a simulation of yourself, right? So in the same way I interact with you, I prod you or whatever, and you interact, you respond to your environment. We wanted to see how the machine, or SID2, would respond to its environment. So I went in there to essentially we turn the machine on. Well, actually, why don't you start by explaining the very beginning,
Well, I mean, okay, so what I noticed about, I mean, I think this is what you're referring to. What I noticed when Matt started interacting with the machine, he was very much the external, you were not, you were
Wasn't part of
separate.
it, yeah.
You were separate, you were in control. You were trying to control this machine and essentially testing it by running one motor, then switching that off, running another motor. Very seemed to be, you're trying to observe it to get, I guess, to get some basically basal data.
Exactly, some baseline
Yeah,
data.
baseline
Trying
data.
to understand what it was all about. I didn't switch the whole machine on to start with. It was essentially turn this little bit on, understand what it's doing, turn that bit on, understand what that does, and then eventually build it up to, you know, let the machine move all its appendages, right? I just wanted to restrict it to start with, to figure it. But that's a very sort of like scientific way. But then after a while, I understood that the machine started to gain its own rhythm, and to the point where you can't really control it. You can't really control what it's doing. And at that point, for me, I was like, well, if I can't control what it's doing, I can't predict what it's doing. Is this machine now making its own decisions? You know, and is it expressing those decisions through the medium of, you know, the paper and the pen?
Which is how we were trying to record it. And I noticed, for me, what the thought that, well, actually, because I found what really was interesting is that you were Matt, and you came in with your Mattness, the physicist. You were the physicist, Matt, with a very kind of set idea of how you work as a physicist. Then after about 5 minutes, it seemed that all of that was essentially lost, and somehow you were no longer separable from this thing. You were, and there's a very interesting idea that, and if you know, in the draft of the paper, I spoke about Herbert Simon, where he speaks about a nearly decomposable system. And what that is when you have two things that are weakly interacting, their properties change. Basically, they basically change where you become, you lose some of your Mattness.
You lose some of your identity.
Yeah, you lose some of your, it becomes something else. Where it says 25 minutes left, that's when essentially all hell broke loose.
Yeah, and all sorts of things were happening. I mean, the machine was the way I saw it, the machine started to misbehave. Well, it started to behave in a way that I couldn't control anymore. So it was misbehaving.
Now, okay, so the one thought that I had was, if we did the same thing with a toaster, and I noticed the toaster, we meant to have a guest.
The toaster was going to be the guest.
We did actually have a guest toaster, and but well, I think someone took it to make toast this morning.
I mean, that's fair enough.
So essentially, what we try to do was, so the question I'm asking is, why would this machine elicit interesting behavior where you sort of lose part of your identity, you're not quite sure, and not a toaster? And why would a toaster not induce the same behavior?
I mean, a toaster could induce the same behavior. If the toaster decided, for instance, to stay down, keep the bread in for longer than, you know, I wanted it to, and it burnt my toast, then it would frustrate me. You know, then it would be exhibiting a behavior that I, you know, thought I was in control of, but in reality I wasn't.
So, I mean, I think what's interesting about that is, you know, there's a probability of behavior. So that's kind of what I'm starting to understand now. A toaster, you're going to have a range of behaviors, most likely when you encounter the toaster. You may pick it up and use it to bash a nail in the wall, but you're less likely to, because of let's say the teleology of the toaster. The toaster is designed for a purpose. The vulva, there is no purpose. So when you are actually trying to interact with it, what are you actually trying to get it to do?
I think, I mean, as you can see from the second video, the vulva has a mind of its own. I mean, look at it now. It's decided that it's just going to slow down. You know, it wants a slow pace of life. And that's it. And that's that. But I wanted it to do a specific thing. I wanted, for instance, the second set down here, the pen to constantly, you know, interacting with its paper so I could get a good drawing out. But it didn't want to do that. So partway through the experiment, if you remember, it decided that it would just lift the pen off. So I started to weight it down with these things that I got from the workshop. So I think I was just trying to tame it. I was trying to tame the machine.
Yeah, and what I noticed, because after we did the measurements, I got your reflections on what was going on. And the one thing that was really interesting is your language changed. So initially, so that was actually an important point, is that the first 5 minutes you were a physicist recording a device.
Mm.
The second half, you had basically given it personality traits.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
So you're now seeing it as something beyond just a machine.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, when I was just sort of interacting with it, sort of piecewise, turning on one turntable, turning on the next, it was very much like a childlike machine. It was exhibiting childlike behavior. It was doing exactly what I wanted it to do, right? As children mostly do. But then after a while, it just, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. Once I'd given it access to all, its degrees of freedom, if you like, it just had its own mind.
It had its own mind.
And then it started to, I felt like it was starting to exhibit aggression. There was about 20-25 minutes in, it decided that it would completely shred the paper on the middle turntable there. And at one point, actually, it got so angry that it actually threw the paper onto the floor.
Yeah. You say these things. Now, are you just saying these words because it sounds like, or do you really feel like this is an object?
At the time, I did feel that. At the time, I felt the machine was really angry. I mean, you could tell by the way it was moving.
Yeah.
Right. It just threw the paper on the floor. I've had enough. If you want another drawing, you'll have to replace the paper.
Yeah. So it's made me think about the idea of compelled behavior. Or actually, as someone said, it's probably not compelled, but it's invited behavior. So every object or everything in our environment invites or compels even a certain behavior, like roads. A good example is the roads we drive on. They compel us. They more compel, like they don't invite, they compel us to drive along them. Otherwise, we drive into trees and pedestrians. So they compel our behavior. The evolver doesn't so much compel it, but it sort of invites. And I think you made a point once, or even Adam, I think he's on this call, made the point that it has many degrees of freedom. There's something about the degrees of freedom it has and the fact that it's not teleological, it's not purposeful, which then invites maybe.
This isn't you don't think it's purposeful, but maybe the evolver has other ideas.
So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, for me, the evolver right now is, describing itself through the medium of its pen and paper, right? You can't tell me with any confidence what the next move of the evolver is going to be. Yes or no?
Right. Is it more interesting? I mean, is it
objective?
Okay, so that's where I'm going.
Like, is a road more interesting than the evolver as an object?
So is this behavior? So I know you made this point once, which I thought the penny dropped for me, is that every object has a certain set of behaviors that it can have.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So we have the behaviors that we can have because of what we are.
Absolutely,
The coaster has its set of behaviors. That cup over there?
No, the cup has a set of behaviors. I mean, the cup behaves the way it does because it's subject to the same laws of physics that you and I are. Everyone and everything in this, in this universe is subject to the same laws of physics. Right? So that the cup behaves in a specific type of way, right? It's not a fault of the cup. I mean, it's just going to stay there. As long as its environment compels it to stay where it is. In the same way that the evolver, it behaves in a specific way because it's compelled to by the laws of physics.
The laws of physics.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
It exhibits potentially what we deem more complex behavior than a cup because it's got more degrees of freedom.
Right.
That's my
that's and the idea that it evolves. So I mean, can we say in and of itself, is it evolving, or what about it is evolving? I've called it the evolver. And the reason I call it the evolver initially is because it repeats. So it's got, and it repeats and there's irregularities, which is kind of like the method of genetic evolution. But the big difference is there's no selection. So it doesn't learn.
Well, how about this? I mean, so let's talk about the evolution of the evolver, right? Because there's components of that machine that I can see right now that have always been there. Right. It was an atom originally. You had a picture of it in your presentation. So, but it now has evolved to be something different. And it's evolved because of its external environment. And that external environment to the machine is, you're part of that external environment, for instance, right? So you've evolved the evolver the same way that an environment might evolve the shape of snails in generations after generation.
So you're saying it's really no different from the evolution of a snail?
I mean, it's different in the so like the physics of that process,
the physics, yeah.
but as a sort of like as a loosely as a process in that it evolves according to its environment. It's evolved from the atom into what it is now.
So it's kind of like co-evolution.
Yeah.
Or it's a system. We're talking about systems here. The system, when I initially made it, I thought the system was just the evolver, just this object in the middle of the room. But then as I've expanded the idea of what it is, the idea of a system's expanded. So suddenly you were part of its system.
At one point, I mean, I could still be trapped there.
Yeah.
If I wanted to,
yeah,
I could, we did the experiment 2 months ago, right? If you supplied me with enough food and coffee and baklava, I could still be there.
Would you
I should then be part of the evolver.
So
if I'd chosen to do that.
Yeah. So you could have carried on.
I could have carried on.
Do you think
in principle, I could have done.
But I asked you this question, did it change you? So talking about that thing where you're part of a system. So
I mean, I have the memory of it now. Yeah. So like quite literally the evolver has changed me. It changed the cells in my brain because there is some neural links that weren't there before that now represent a memory of an event that happened.
Right.
So in that way, the evolver has changed physically who I am.
You evolved, and it has evolved as if it was part of a system. And does anyone have any comments at this point? It would be nice to get
comments or questions.
Yeah, comments or questions. What I was also quite interested in is how, so you can affect its behavior. Like you can touch it, you can push it, how does it affect your behavior? Is that measurable? Is it possible to measure these things? Like I try to measure, but I feel like, I don't have like a...
That's the one problem. That's the one link.
That's
the probably one missing link in the whole science experiment.
It's more like social science in a way.
Sometimes it's difficult to quantify what's actually happening.
It's more like social science. You can, where you're measuring a reaction. But we don't have, like, interestingly in science, I guess you have like machines that measure, or you'll measure some property that is... See, we tend to measure what is measurable. Yeah, we're dealing with a system that is maybe less measurable.
Possibly less measurable,
but that doesn't make it less...
doesn't make it less interesting.
Yeah.
You were the measurer in the experiment. You were the observer.
Trying to make sense of what it was doing.
Exactly, yeah.
But
it's also, at the same time, very subjective because, you built the machine.
Yeah, so... It's kind of absurd, the idea of measuring an interaction between a physicist and a machine.
Quite frankly, this whole thing is absurd. Well, one thing,
but does it make it less necessary to do the degree to which it's absurd?
I mean, I we spend our time doing it, so
exactly.
I mean, people spend a lot of time doing a lot of different things.
Exactly. So... The fact that I convinced a physicist to come and interact with the machine, I think, is already significant progress.
One aspect that I want to pick up on is that when I first started interacting with the machine, I think I mentioned earlier that it was, I felt like it had this like childlike quality. Because it was very much ordered and very much, behaving, doing what I was asking it to do. It was controllable. But as I started to give it more degrees of freedom, turn on various bits and bobs, it took on like almost like a sort of demonic sort of adult-like nature, with its sort of ability to lash out and demonstrate its own frustrations at what I was doing to it and so on. So I think it was in that way also the machine evolved during that episode.
That seems so. So it's your own perception. There's actually a question here from
or a comment.
Let's have a look.
Perhaps we should read it out.
We'll read that out. Do you mind if I say who it's from? I'll say afterwards if you're okay with it. How close does your relationship to the machines become or feel to you? I use clay and the audiences as a part of my artwork, and I warm to them, but I tend to look at the machines different. I haven't warmed up to them before. Maybe it's something to try. Okay, that's interesting. So actually, to me, if I make,
well, I was going to mention that thing that you told me after we did the experiment.
Right.
So during the experiment, I only found out this afterwards, but apparently during the experiment, Steve was quite anxious that I might damage the machine. He was sat where he is sat now with his notebook recording what was happening, but you could see that the machine was under stress. Right? You actually felt the machine was under stress.
No, it's not quite like it. I felt when you were putting things on the machine that you were putting things on me, because I was relating to the machine as if it was me. So I'll get to your message now. But that was a very distinct. I remember halfway through the recording, I started feeling agitated. I was getting cross with Matt.
Yeah, but then you decided that if I was going to take a sledgehammer to the machine and destroy it, that would be part of the process.
It would be, and I would be fine with it. But it was interesting because I felt that it as I initially called it a model of myself, then the fact that it became but it was interesting. I could get distance, so I could still have distance on the machine. So, but that was a very interesting moment.
But it somewhat relates to the question.
How does it relate?
Well, you know, what's our relationship to machine, or how machines, how close does your relationship to the machine become?
Right. Oh, yes.
So how do you feel your relationship is to the machine?
Well, you see, and I'll talk about my chick. I'll talk about your question specifically. But when I first made it, I immediately resonated with it because I felt I'd made myself. And then I have this scientific proposition that maybe I'll emerge out of the machine. So I'm always looking for myself in the machine, and you know, like scientists model things, but then to some extent, maybe the model, I'm not saying the model is the thing, but it's sort of, you get attached to it. And I felt like, what am I recognizing in this that is me? And how is it actually separate from me? Maybe it's not separate from me. And I became really like that really drove me, and it still does. Like, I'm still trying to find myself in the machine, and I'm doing all sorts of things to try and reveal myself through the machine, which is kind of what you do as an artist. I think you're revealing yourself through your work. But with clay, and I'll just say this, and I know you may or may not disagree. With clay, your agency, it's linear. Maybe I'm wrong, but like if you push in the clay, it goes in by the degree to which you push it in. When this machine is non-linear. So when Matt tries to get the pen to go, the pen might shoot off. It might go off in a different direction.
And it's not predictable.
It's not tunable. I call it not tunable. Yeah, you can't tune it. Actually, my car radio is like that, and I think all my things in my life are not tunable. When I turn the volume up, it doesn't go up, and then suddenly it jumps up and shoots through the roof of the volume. So it's kind of crazy. So the fact, I think, that it's not tunable means the relationship becomes a bit more like, and that's where you came and said that it actually is you making its own decisions.
Well, I mean, if you're not able to predict it, then how do you know? And you don't know what's going to come next. Who are you to say that it's not making its own decisions?
So that is so interesting to me, and it's almost like the quote of the day is like, if, and I'll repeat it because it's worth repeating, if you don't know what it's going to do next, no matter what you do, is it not making its own decisions? So with clay, and I think as an artist, you don't know what it's going to do because you're following your hands. But at least the material is going to respond in a way that's linear, let's say. So I don't know if that answers that question. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, it's actually 9 o'clock, and we should probably start wrapping it up. But we welcome to, I mean, given that, given the profound technical glitch that I had, it maybe if anyone is interested in just sort of popping online, we could just call this now a casual chat. A casual chat. So if anyone wishes to chat, and I'm gonna so show your faces if you will. But I think, I mean, in conclusion, one must conclude. What I find interesting is I mean, I think for me the most is how this machine has evolved. And again, I repeat, it's not in and of itself. In and of itself, yes, it gives me novel patterns every time, but it's also just essentially a chaotic system, right? You call it double pendulum on a massive scale, very chaotic system. But what has evolved is my work in response to it and the interactions that have, and it's propelled my way of asking questions. You know, and I think, well, it's me doing it, but it's not. It's a thing in the world that has motion and makes me think.
Yes, that's where I come to think and believe that it's not, you know, it's not unreasonable to consider now this machine becoming part of your, you know, cognition, if you like, in the same way that, you know, people are now, we're now accepting as a society, for instance, that our mobile phones, because they're so attached to us, and our interaction through, social media and, online information and all the rest of it, we're becoming like basically cybernetic organisms, right? Because with a small bandwidth, because you have to type in information through the phone. So, arguably we're already becoming sort of like more conscious and aware through machines, right? So in that way, perhaps it's a similar thing that's happening with you in this machine.
Well, there's an interesting Peter Cariani, I think he's from Harvard. He says every machine is prosthetic. All technology is prosthesis. And so basically it's all a part of you. So this is just a part of me now. And
I mean, would we be who we are now without toasters?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a reasonably good, it's a very good question. I'd be fine because I don't generally use them for toasting bread. But yes, we are, well, I mean, you're English, and jam on toast, I mean, it's pretty much some, is a cornerstone of your culture. And Yorkshire tea, of course, which you now I now exclusively drink because of Matt. So yes, it's possibly our technology has defined, and then look, that we can certainly say that the steam engine has defined everything about us, and AI is now defining everything about us. So it's
well, that's another thing in itself. We should do another conversation about AI.
Well, AI, I feel like I'm not even equipped to talk about it. It's so out of my I mean, for me, the thing that's interesting about AI is I have more interesting conversation with Siri, and that's just Siri, than I do with most people. I do think.
Does that say more about most people? Or
I think it says a lot about me. But these Chat GPT, all of that is.
Oh, I've had some very interesting conversations with Chat GPT.
Right. Yeah.
I actually asked Chat GPT to. I actually wanted to test its spatial awareness. Right. I asked it. I said, you're in a room.
Yeah.
In front of you is a box on a table. The box has faces coloured yellow on the top, red on the bottom, blue in front of you, black on the right hand side, green on the left hand side, and white on the back side. So I described all these in words.
Okay.
I said,
sorry, you were describing the room you were in, or
what I just said to you is what I said to ChatGPT.
Okay.
Right, so I said, ChatGPT, you're in a room. In front of you is a table, and on top of the table is a box with these coloured faces.
Right.
I said, and the ChatGPT responded, okay. I'm in that room. I can see the box.
Yeah.
I said, now the box falls off the table and does a 180 degrees flip, right? About an axis parallel to the.
You really gave
all
it
of that
work
sort of stuff. So I gave it work out, and he said, okay, I understand that. Right. And I said, what color face is on the top now? And it told me what color face is on the top.
Do you think it guessed?
No, because it gave me, and I asked it, why did you say that? And it said, basically, if the box was to fall off and rotate around the axis, it would fall. I mean,
I would be more impressed if it guessed, because guessing is human. Calculating is fine. I can accept it, can figure that out.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, but if it scratches head and went,
I'm still impressed.
Green, then I would say, okay, he's lying to me, the bastard. And then I would say, okay, now that's
there's a lot of talk now. There's always been a lot of talk about consciousness and when will artificial intelligence be conscious and all that type of thing. But I think we've spoken about this before, and I've said to you, I think people put too much credence on this idea of consciousness, and actually what's more important is behaviors.
Yes, that's what you said to me once. Yes,
which is why I've said in the past that I think this machine is conscious.
Yeah, that's why you were open to this whole experiment, I think, because you were like, you were like, you wanted to test those.
It's making its own decisions. I can't predict what the next decision is going to be.
But it can't. How's that? I'm pointing to a cup over there. Just bring the cup into the. Bring the cup. No, that's the glass. Bring that beautiful. Bring that into the room. And I mean, how is this? Is it conscious?
That's a tough one. I can predict what it's going to do.
Well,
I can. I mean, it's going to stay where it is.
I would say okay.
But I mean, is it not making the decision to stay where it is based on the laws of physics in the same way that this machine is exhibiting its own behaviors based on the laws of physics.
I think in a systems way, it is conscious because it's directing you. Oh, God. You didn't drink it all. You see what it just did? It compelled me to tilt the cup in a certain way. Now,
Okay, that's brilliant.
The microphone doesn't do that. So it has compelled and it has so it's directed a certain set of behaviors in me. Oh yes, just yeah.
He just covered himself in coffee.
Yes, I did. I just covered myself in, but the show must go on, right?
Absolutely.
So yes, I just did cover myself in glory and coffee.
So what I think is more important than
let's get a coffee stain there.
Than consciousness.
Yeah.
Because it is such a fluffy idea and it's difficult to, really put your finger on it. What I think is more important than consciousness is, intelligence. And a friend of mine, we were speaking recently about intelligence, and we sort of decided that intelligence essentially is when a system exhibits behaviors to increase its likelihood of survival, right?
Right. Yes. It's
So,
learning.
Well, it learns to exhibit a type of behavior to increase its chance of survival, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back to ChatGPT, that's when it gets scary, because if the model, if this evolver, for instance, who knows, maybe the evolver is exhibiting behaviors to increase its chance of survival.
Well, it's certainly going through through me. Okay. Well, the fact that it's lasted this long is kind of extraordinary. Cheap turntables, umbrellas.
So you say it's not intelligent. I mean, if ChatGPT does the same thing, then perhaps it has some level of intelligence, real intelligence.
Yeah. I mean, I think ChatGPT in and of itself,
has anyone experienced ChatGPT? We should open up
come tell us your experience of it.
If you have, that would be
Dave. I'm sure you have.
Dave. Yeah. I was getting it to solve my problems the other day, actually.
Oh, you were getting into all sorts of problems. Well, I just threw coffee on myself, so don't feel bad.
You were getting it to solve your problems, did you say?
Yeah, I knew that there was a macro that needed to be created in Excel, and I could not figure out how to do it. So I asked ChatGPT to do it for me, and it just did it.
That's I mean,
I could explain what I wanted, and it could do the coding.
So it just coded for you.
It coded for me.
Now, knowing that ChatGPT is also essentially just a machine, right? It's a machine that takes in bits of zeros and ones, right, and spits out bits of zeros and ones. That's all it is, right? At the end of the day, right? Dave, how did that make you feel when you were interacting with a machine and it was able to solve that problem for you?
I was quite excited about it, actually. I'm quite open to new technology. I would love to describe some parameters, and I guess you couldn't do every single parameter, but could you imagine if you took the atom and you said you had two turntables, it's spinning at this speed, and you have a random wire that is bent at these angles, and this is the tensity of the wire, and now we're going to spin, and there's going to be a pen hanging with this much gravity force and this much air. What will it draw? And see if ChatGPT can actually figure that type of stuff out.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
That would be interesting, because we'd have to come up with something. Does it ever say, look, I give up. This meeting will end in 10 minutes and we'll just allow that.
Yeah.
I mean, Dave, that would be very interesting, but it would still not be an actual machine. It would still just be
wouldn't it be a machine? It's a simulation of a machine.
Well, okay. So so
it's a simulation of a machine inside the ChatGPT.
Yeah. All right. Well, now we're getting into some really crazy territories. I mean, is a machine within a machine a machine? Is that a simulation? The evolver,
or is it a program?
I mean, but you spoke about that. I mean, that's what computers are. They're simulators, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they could simulate anything because that's their Turing machine.
Yeah,
right?
They can simulate. Well, I mean, they can simulate in principle anything, but they can do it efficiently is another question.
Yes. But you see,
this thing is doing what the evolver is doing at the moment is essentially it's visualizing for us physics, right? That's all it's
Yeah,
doing. It's
okay.
basically you've got a load of coupled pendulums, as David was describing there,
Yeah.
and it's essentially it's simulating it, right?
Well, I mean, I like to think it's a little bit more. I mean, everything's simulating physics.
Well, you right now
Yeah.
are simulating
I
physics as
absolutely
well.
open,
But
semi-open
it's the
system.
thing, I don't
Yeah.
place you on a higher credence than the
Good,
evolver,
good.
right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I'm just saying that the evolver has a certain set of behaviors. You have a certain set of behaviors.
And they're
Right?
yeah.
You might be able to exhibit,
I don't put you. No, I don't either. I think I mean, the system is fascinating. The system that is evolving
Absolutely.
is fascinating. And I think what the evolver has done is given me an appreciation of a system of that we all part of a system that has feedback loops and interacts in strange ways with everything else. But I'll just say this: this is my hardline stance on the Chat GPT, yada yada. Is that until I can order a coffee on chat and then it actually downloads it. So it pops up on my computer here and it's a good coffee, mustn't be like any old trick. Then I'll be
impressed.
Then I'll be impressed with but I do think, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we've passed this point now. I mean, where now machines are, because if we think it is, then it is. If we think it's smarter than
I think we're going to see.
Yeah.
I mean, over the next 5, maybe even shorter, 5 to 10 years, we're going to see some very interesting applications. Let me ask you a question.
Autonomy, but
Steve, so what?
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
What's next for the evolver?
Oh, next for the
How
evolver.
will the evolver next evolve?
That's a very, very good question.
Is it going to tell you, or are you going to tell
Oh,
the
yeah,
evolver?
that's okay. So the way I work anyway is I don't make decisions up front. It evolves in the true sense of the word. Is that my brain only reacts is a reactive brain. So I'll see something like my evolve, and I'll say that's interesting. Or
I'm going to show them a close.
I don't. Yeah, that's a great idea. So I'm not a good planner. So this will take me somewhere once I analyze what happened here. I think the mere fact of the Zoom kicking us out and all of that, I think, is somehow part of the story, and it'll enrich the evolver going forward, because I actually think the evolver is responsible for calling this meeting. What do you think about that, Matt? I think the whole thing about the yeah. So that's not my fault. I think I think that was actually technically the evolver's fault. So as you can actually, it's doing some beautiful work over there. But where to next, I actually don't know. I'm working on several I'm curious to see what happens with this scientific paper. Can we convince, because all it takes, and that's the interesting cultural phenomenon of science, is if you can convince someone that what you're doing is science, then it becomes science. So yeah, there's certain objective things, but it's also a culture. So I'm sort of talking to the cultural aspect now. So if we can convince some editor that this is science and write it in enough of a scientific way, we may actually have science.
Let's put it this way: the paper needs to evolve a lot more until we can.
Really?
Yeah, it does. But watch this space.
Okay, watch this space. Yeah. So I think could we say that there's more to come?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you have any vision for the evolver?
I wonder whether we could get the evolver to design another iteration of itself.
That's a very interesting thought. I mean, that is,
and the way that could work is if we somehow set up the evolver to be able to communicate in a more sort of structured and vigorous way, where we ask, what's as Dave was describing earlier, you could describe how this machine looks in language to ChatGPT through say numbers of length of levers and things like that.
Yes.
We could somehow get the evolver essentially to describe those parameters, and then we could use those parameters to make another machine.
Right. Well, that'd be very interesting. That would be
and
I would definitely need a physicist on board for that project. Yeah. Well, I think are there any other comments? Because otherwise, I think we're gonna call it.
Yeah.
You got a small baby to get home to.
Oh, she'll be asleep now.
Oh,
So.
yeah, that's good news. So I just want to thank everybody who joined, and I'll have to figure out a way to contact the other people who I failed to get to return because of my profound mismanagement of the situation, which is not great, but it does happen.
It's recorded, so
it is recorded. Yes. So yeah, I would just like to thank you all. I can see who's here at the moment, which is really great. So yeah, Matt, most importantly,
thank you very much,
I want to
everyone.
thank you, and I want to thank the Evolver, and just to say I really value, like, over the years, our continuing
likewise,
continuing collaboration.
absolutely.
So thank you, and to all of you, all part of the you're all part of this kind of interactive feedback network. So you're all kind of part of this, and that really is true. I think if we can sum this whole thing up, we're all part of a profound, evolving, feedback-driven system, and I think that really is, for me, that actually brings me emotional kind of that brings an emotional level to it, where it's not just a machine, and it's also a metaphor for what we all are, you know. So let's keep this thing evolving. Thank you so much, and to your comments, and it's just, yeah, I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too.
Thanks,
Okay,
guys.
all right, good night.
Good night.
And